I'm so glad that Kristina Reardon can join Pui Lan and I today to talk about the challenges of turning a class into a community when we teach remotely. Kristina is the director of the Writers Workshop at Holy Cross, so welcome, Kristina.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, the word in your job title, workshop, carries this emphasis of a group working together and exchanging ideas. So it already connotes a sense of community to me. I think there are two different sets of relationships to cultivate when we talk about a class as a community of teaching and learning. There is, first of all, the relationship between an instructor and a class. And second, which is actually more important as far as I'm concerned, there's also the relationship among the students themselves without the instructor. Can we talk a little bit about how instructors may build relationship with the students first? What have you done or what do you think can be done to facilitate that relationship virtually?
I think that's a real challenge. I think that whether you have a lot of experience teaching online or just a little bit, you were thrust into this in the spring, these are really challenging moments to teach online. And so while we can look to literature on community building in online learning environments, some of those techniques and tactics have to be adjusted for this current moment of extreme anxiety among students. I bring up the idea of anxiety among students because it's something I've observed in my classrooms, that students are very anxious about the world, their grades, of course, as always, the classroom environment, and about the community that they have and maybe are not building the way they normally would. So I think one of the ways that I have successfully built community in the class I'm teaching this semester online is by talking about those anxieties, by bringing up the first 10 minutes of every class. I simply ask students how they're doing, but I don't just ask as an open-ended question because, as I'm sure many of you have, if you ask a group of students, like, how are you doing? They don't respond usually, especially online, Um, so I ask very pointed questions about how things in their life or the world might be going that have nothing to do with class. And just this past week, my 7-month-old puppy made, a big noise behind me as I was talking in those first 10 minutes. And I used that as an opportunity to say, would you like to meet my 7-month-old puppy? And so then all of a sudden, 5 or 6 students were holding up their cats or their dogs. And we just took 5 minutes and did show and tell, who are your pets? And I know this sounds very silly, but it is something that I do at the first 5 or 10 minutes of every class. And I think in terms of investment in how students are doing and their comfort level talking, after the puppy show and tell, I had 75% of the class with their cameras on talking. So it was a good investment in my opinion because it led to a better class discussion afterwards. So I mean, there are a lot of different things I think you can do to build community, but the things sometimes that happened by accident are the things that worked the best, weirdly enough, so far for me anyways. Of course, there are intentional things you can script in, but I think those accidents.
I have to borrow a dog or a cat or
Yeah,
something.
borrow a dog or a cat, yeah. Or a child or something, it
Yeah.
is, yeah, I do think I think it's just one of those things that whatever your interruption is, I think that the students see you as human and then
Mm.
they engage. I mean, one of my very first classes, for all of my professed tech savvy, at one of my very first classes, I couldn't get my microphone to work correctly because I had bought this whole new setup and I was so excited. Of course, it doesn't work the first time you try it out, but all the students had their cameras on. They were trying to give me advice. And that was another moment where it was unintentional engagement. And then I had them there and then they were talking. So I think capitalizing on those little accidents can be very useful.
Can I ask you when you open it up for, I know you said 5, 10 minutes to talk
Yeah.
about how they are doing.
Mm.
Have you had an experience whether something really serious was mentioned? Then how do you handle that? If there
Yeah.
is, maybe that's not the case.
So actually, interestingly enough, this semester that's not happened, but I often do this in my classes, even in person, and sometimes it does, especially with the news in the world right now. Sometimes students will comment on how things in the larger culture or even the campus culture will impact them very directly and often very personally. But I find that doesn't really happen unless they trust the other class members as well as me. That's much more likely to happen, I feel like, in office hours. And so what happens is in those 5 or 10-minute moments where we're talking about how students are doing, that might inspire a student who's actually struggling or wanting to talk about something serious to follow up and come to office hours or make an appointment to talk to me about something that may or may not have to do with the class, but it sort of just is an informal, implied invitation to students to talk. And I've had that happen this semester. I've had, even in the last week, maybe 3 students email me after class to say, so can I talk to you about this other thing that's going on with my school life? It doesn't have to do with your class, but I'm really worried about my work on the campus newspaper. Can we talk about that? And, you know, that conversation was actually much more serious than it might sound from just the sort of introduction. But I think those little signals you give to students that you care, whatever they might be, showing students you care about them beyond their grade or whether or not they're turning in their assignments on time, opens those small opportunities. And even if they're not sharing with a large group, they know they can share with you. And I think that builds a certain community between professor and student, right? And then maybe the student to student stuff starts to build from there because students get more comfortable sharing in front of the professor.
Do they email you when they want to meet with you? Or you have just regular office hours that the students can drop by to talk to you?
Yeah, I have office hours. I don't know how this is working for either of you, but I have office hours and I've had maybe 2 students come to my office hours. Office hours are so funny because you try to pick a time when you're available and somehow my luck is that I pick the only time it feels like my students are not available every semester as my office hours. So I just kind of say by appointment as well. And I make that very clear in class. So the majority of the student meetings I've had have been outside of office hours for whatever reason, whether they have class or it's just inconvenient. I don't know. Maybe I'm just exceptionally bad at picking office hour times. But especially in the Zoom environment, I think students just, they don't want to wait around if another student might be in your Zoom space at that moment, and they'd rather just make an appointment. At least that's what they've told me. They're just so tired of being on Zoom. They'd rather make a guaranteed appointment where they know you'll be there, you'll be available, and they can talk to you.
I do the same in terms of office hours. I'm going to ask you a slightly different kind of a question.
Yeah.
Do you think that your age and your gender and your race have something to do with I don't know what I would call this, the readiness of some of your students to contact you one-on-one to talk about things?
Yes, to all of those things. I think that is absolutely true. So for one thing, age. I think that students can see that, you know, maybe I look like one of the younger faculty members they interact with. So I'm not officially a faculty member, but I do teach. I direct a center, right? So I don't want to misrepresent myself that way, but I'm one of the younger instructors that they might encounter. And so I do think, and that is sometimes problematic. I think that can lead to difficult situations and conversations sometimes. So in the past, that's led to students confessing or talking about things that maybe cross certain boundaries or certain lines. And so I have to interrupt students and say, okay, I'm a mandated reporter as well as someone who wants to support you and who's your instructor and who wants to be here for you emotionally. But students will sometimes reveal things that you know, I do want to support them with, and I never want to shut down any conversation that they want to have, but I have to remind them of my role sometimes because they think I can keep a secret or something like that. And again, they're not telling me, I guess, anything that is, I don't know, so secretive necessarily, but rather with Title IX reporting, for example, I've had students come to my office and tell me very personal details about things that have happened on campus or off campus, thinking that I'm kind of like a friend and I want to be a support, but I have a title and a role and a responsibility to both the student and my position that I would, you know, direct students to appropriate channels and give them institutional resources. At least that's how my role has been explained to me. So that becomes very complicated, I think. that hasn't come up quite so much right now. But with regard to gender, it's really interesting because you ask about gender, age, and race. And with regard to gender, my husband also teaches at the same college where I teach, and we both get a lot of different students in our offices talking to us about different things. But I feel like I get a lot more tears in my office than he does. I get, and I was just talking to someone this morning, maybe I just have a very open or friendly face because I get a lot of
You do.
well, thanks, but I feel like I invite those, and I feel like there are people who know that, like, you know, you meet someone and within 10 minutes they start telling you their whole life story, and I feel like that's I feel like that's a very gendered thing. Maybe I'm wrong, but it feels very gendered to me, that students come to my office and we'll just start talking about different challenges they have. And I think it's a wonderful responsibility to be able to be there for students in those moments and to support them. But I do feel like I get an awful lot of that on a regular basis. And with regard to race, I think that race, I mean, I feel like race is always playing a role in the relationships we have, whether we acknowledge it or not. And so I don't know how or in what way I might see race intervening in some of these conversations. But I do get an awful lot of white students coming into my office hours, for example, saying things like, I don't know how to talk about these issues. Can you please tell me? Can you decode this or tell me the right language to use? And maybe that's because we're both white and they don't feel intimidated or scared of getting it wrong, or they feel like they can ask these questions. So I do see some of that. So the course I'm teaching this semester actually deals with race outright. And so maybe that's also why I get some of those questions as well. In terms of students of color coming to talk to me, I get, you know, all the students in my classes coming at different moments, but I do notice the conversations are different, right? So white students are often asking, you know, things like, I have this thought, is that racist? Can you help me work through this? Or sometimes they're combative. They want to tell me their views on how they disagree with what they feel the course material is presenting. And, you know, so that's a whole other side of things. But a few of the students of color in my classes right now, where we're talking about race every day, have come to office hours to tell me how they are engaging with the material, but they don't feel like they want to talk in class. And can we talk about how they don't want their grade impacted by the fact that they can't formulate a response on the spot because the material is a lot for them to take in, they feel, in comparison to their white peers. And so the conversations we have are circling around similar topics, but they're very different in tone. That's just a small cross-section of the students I'm teaching in my class. I don't mean to generalize that or overgeneralize it, but those have been my experiences. So, you know, I do think those things matter. How do you all feel about that? Do you feel like age, gender, and race factor into your conversations with your students?
As you were speaking, Christina, I was thinking about how would this play out in an online setting. You already mentioned that sometimes because it is online, and many of us recorded our classroom teaching so that other students can have access to the recording. And I was wondering whether it makes any difference, or have you done something differently that is in the online setting to build community, which might be different from a face-to-face setting?
Yeah, so all the examples I've been giving right now, I should specify, have come from my online teaching this semester, last semester, and then prior to being pushed into the pandemic, I taught online in a more asynchronous environment at another institution for a few years. So these examples have all come from online environments, but they've come from one-on-one meetings via Zoom or in the Zoom classroom. In terms of what I do in the classroom to build community so that these conversations arise or feel like they can happen, aside from accidents or starting out the class asking how students think things are going, I don't record the Zoom classes. And I think that in a weird way can build community. And now that's very intentional because we're talking about sensitive topics and it's a discussion-based class. If I have information to deliver, I record that ahead of time and post it in my class. So if I have content knowledge that does not involve students sharing details about their lives or their thoughts or their intellectual processes, again, I will post those and make them available asynchronously. But some of the community and the willingness, I think, of students to share comes from the fact that they might not be recorded, which I know there's a debate about access in terms of recording versus not recording. So that's just a tricky situation. But in my class, no one had an accommodation where they needed a recording. So I was free to make that decision to record or not record. What I do instead is I also post my notes after class. I'll post a page full of notes. So if someone missed something, they can consult there. But in addition to not recording and having some of these open conversations, I do a couple of different things in my classes. I use breakout rooms with my students, and I do, instead of just putting them into random groups, I will pick 5 or 6 topics related to the larger conversation that they can opt into, and I'll label each of the breakout rooms with that topic or subtopic of the conversation and let students choose which room they would like to go to. So they have that opportunity. And the way I do that is I ask them to look at the names of the breakout rooms, and then in Zoom they can click on their the little dots in the upper corner of their screen or of their image, and they can change their name. They can edit their name on Zoom, and I ask them to edit their name to the group number. So they put the group number in front of their name, and then I can manually put them into groups really quickly. When they're in Zoom rooms, the students have told me, I just did a survey with my class last week, and they told me that in some classes they don't talk a lot when they're in breakout rooms, because although they might have a topic, students are shy or reticent to share, and they're not sure what the goal of the group is. So I try to make the goals for my breakout rooms extremely clear. I give students 3 or 4 questions that they should be talking about, and I type those out. I put them in the chat, but I also put them in a Google Doc, and then I give the class access to the Google Doc, and I ask them to take notes on their conversation. So one person in the group is a note taker, and so I can see while they're in breakout rooms if they're making progress, and if they're not, I can jump in and guide them or push them in a certain direction that might be productive. And then when they come back to the larger group, they all have to pick one person who will give a quick synopsis of what they talked about. And so they have to choose that person, and they're responsible for what they talked about. That might seem like micromanaging, and in some ways it kind of is, but because I've given them extremely specific tasks and they have to come back and report to the class, they do have to talk in those moments. And week 1, when I started doing this, I would put the students in breakout rooms for 4 minutes, 5 minutes, just to see how it went. And they'd talk a little bit and they'd come back. But when they actually saw that I was really deeply relying on their responses to the questions in the breakout rooms to structure the rest of class discussion, the conversations that lasted 5 minutes would start to last a little bit longer. I'd call them back to the regular room, and they wouldn't come back until the 60-second interval that Zoom gave them was up. And then they'd say, can we have 2 more minutes? And I put them back in. And so now we're up to 10 minutes. And I was just told this past week, 10 minutes is not enough time for conversation in breakout rooms. And I don't know how long I really want to release them into breakout rooms. I feel like 10 to 12 minutes is probably my max before I want to pull them back. But I think really interestingly, what felt like micromanaging at first was necessary structure, so that students understood how to build relationships with each other around course material in breakout rooms. And then when they come back, I know I can cold call on my students without it really being cold calling. So I can pull them all into conversation, because I don't have to say, oh, what do you think about this topic? I can say, tell me what your group talked about. And then the student doesn't feel like they have to share something deeply personal, or even that was their own idea if they're afraid of doing that in the group. So if I could recommend any technique, it was highly structured breakout rooms that lead back to a larger class discussion, assuming you're using a discussion room, a discussion-based model for your classes, of course. But that, I think, has been the biggest thing that has led to community growth in the online environment in my classes.
Great idea. I want to move it along a little bit and begin to talk about, Kristina, do you do anything to facilitate community among the students without you? Because sometimes I feel like in this environment, the more contact they have one with another would be better. And I don't necessarily always have to be a part of it. Do you do anything to facilitate that aspect of the communal relationship?
It's really interesting. So I run the Writers Workshop, which is the peer tutoring center for writing. And I feel like that's been my biggest success area in getting my students to build community without me. And they always start in that in the writer's workshop by taking a class with me. So they have that shared experience, but they kind of fracture off into little groups. And they have group text chains that I am not a part of, where they talk about their work and they talk to each other and they work with each other on different problems. The way I set that up was by putting them into working groups. And this might be very specific to a tutoring center, but we had a few questions or things we wanted to either research or accomplish or do some work on throughout the semester. And so students got to choose which working group or working question they would be a part of, and they were put in groups with others who wanted to work with them on that task. And then they report back to me once a month on what they're doing. So I sort of provide the structure or the space for them to do something together, but I don't dictate what it has to be. And I do short check-ins, but I don't want to be part of that everyday conversation around these items. And that has worked really well in the tutoring center. In my own classes, I don't think I've been quite as successful. And in part, that's because I guess I haven't pushed it or forced it up until this point. But students will start working on a group project in my class soon. I wanted them to get through the first month and turn in some of their work independently first. And now they'll start working on a group project. And I hope that by putting them, similarly to what I described at the writer's workshop, by putting them in spaces where I need them to work together without scripting exactly how they do it, might help them come together and have conversations that I'm not structuring quite as much as those breakout rooms as they move forward. So I think one thing that I've seen other people do that could help with some of that is creating a space on an app like GroupMe or something like that, where students can connect and have conversations in a group setting without me, or they can have a text chain without necessarily having to exchange phone numbers, because that might be pretty awkward on Zoom if they don't know each other. I can't imagine that someone would, want to just go collect everyone's phone number or something like that. But I have thought about setting up a GroupMe for my current Zoom class to see if they would be engaged with that in any way. But then on the other hand, like I said, if I set that up, then will they feel like they can talk? Should I really be a part of that? I don't want to overly structure it. So yeah, I guess I've been successful with my tutoring staff, and then I am trying to use this group project moving forward with my class.
And when you do a text chain, what is the medium? What's the venue that you use?
So GroupMe is what I've used. So students can download this app called GroupMe, and then they can choose if they want the app to function just within the app, and then they'll get kind of a text chain there, and students can join different groups, and then they can post in those groups. It's kind of like a cross between text messaging and then maybe like a social media stream or post that lives in an app. But if I want, I can get GroupMe to actually forward those messages straight to my right to my phone in my texting app. So it'll pop up and look like a text message that came from GroupMe, but it will show the student who posted it or someone else who posted it. It'll show their name and whatever the comment is. And so I'm in a more institutional GroupMe group right now with students who just want information on support and resources. So whenever I run a workshop or something, I'll send a text out saying, don't forget, there's a workshop today. Join me right now. I'm available at this workshop or whatever. And students seem to follow those links that I post there and jump into the workshop. So some students might already be using this platform, at least on the campus where I'm at, where we're at, Benny. They're using that for some other spaces with student affairs and other organizations. So I kind of jumped onto that. I looked at what, I guess if I were giving advice for other campuses, look at the apps that students are already on, look at maybe what student affairs is already using. The last thing I want to do is add another app, even if GroupMe is great. If your students aren't using GroupMe, introducing GroupMe is probably not the best idea, whatever they're using. There are other apps that can do this as well. Some people I've seen using Padlet to do certain things. I've seen other people using, I don't even know, there's probably like 10 different apps you can use for this. But whatever your campus is using, if you can jump on that maybe and create a space for your students, that could be a useful place to go.
I'm ashamed to say that
I don't. Go ahead. Some of the students are very much into this app, and what about those students who are lagging behind? That is, they do not participate so enthusiastically, and especially I know that in college setting, they have so many demands, And how do you deal with people who may not, for example, if you want them to participate, they may not be so ready, and then they are very new to this GroupMe or whatever apps.
Yeah, and so so you're saying they're not participating with their peers or not participating in the larger class discussion?
It may be both.
Both. Yeah, I mean, I guess I try to stay away from the apps, at least in my classroom. I use them as supplemental things that students can opt into or opt out of, because I don't want to create that barrier of access for students who might not have the tech savvy or the desire to do some of the messaging or whatever that work is outside of class. I'm teaching a class on digital writing, so you would assume that the students enrolled in the course would be somewhat tech savvy, but actually some of the students enrolled in the course, because they were not tech savvy, they have no social media accounts whatsoever, and that's a stance they're taking. They don't want to be a part of social media, they know what it is, and they're not interested. And I think that's really fascinating. And I love to hear more from those students about their vantage point, because I think the other students in the class who are obsessed with Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is, that's just a really productive and interesting space for those two viewpoints to clash. But it also creates really complicated and interesting dilemmas when you're trying to engage students, right? Part of engaging students for me has always been finding out where they are and meeting them where they are. And whenever we overly generalize about how students are always on their phones or always using apps or whatever that might be, we risk alienating the students who aren't or who don't have access to those things in those spaces. So I've really tried to make sure that everything we do is in Canvas, which is our learning management system, and that I use those spaces appropriately so everybody has the same access to material. Anything I would ever put on an app or anything like that to engage students, I would make sure it is supplemental and also repeated in Canvas. So whenever I do any sort of messaging to students, I want to make sure that they're not just getting the message in one space. I always try to make sure there's 2 places or more that they can encounter the same message, because sometimes it's just confusing to navigate an online course or something else. So I try not to leave students behind in that way. But in terms of their engagement with their peers and with their class, I think one of the hard things that I'm finding this semester is that I can't control all of those pieces of a student's academic life. And so the question becomes, should I be trying to control that and push them to participate and push them to do all of these supplemental or enriching activities, or should I be letting them opt in and opt out as they see fit or as they want to? Sometimes as an instructor, I overestimate the importance of my course to my students' lives, I think. And it's the most important thing going on in my life currently. But for some of them, I'm not sure that's the case. I don't think we agree. And so, so some of that is for me learning how to let go and say, I'm providing these resources, I'm providing these opportunities, they're here. If you need help accessing them, I will be here to help you access them, but I will not force you to do these things. And sometimes, you know, if students opt out of things, sometimes there are consequences, right? If they choose not to engage in something that counts for their grade, you know, that's their choice, but it also has, you know, a consequence in the course. And just making sure they're aware of that and they're making good decisions is what I really feel my role is in that case. And I never grade them for engaging in an app or something like that. But in general, I'm just sort of talking about the class as a whole. I feel like my job this semester has been to let students know what they can do, what they should do, and then what are optional opportunities and how engaging or not engaging in those optional opportunities will impact their learning and or their grades. So I think that's the best I've been able to come up with. I can't force everyone to engage.
You know, that reminded me of something you taught me over the summer to make yourself more personal and accessible in a remote environment. You talk about how you actually inserted videos in your syllabus.
Yeah.
So the students will see you and you're talking to them instead of them reading words on a piece of paper. I tried that and then I thought, well, I'll do better. I would do better than Kristina. I would actually do, in addition to what I've inserted in my syllabus, every so often I would add something onto Canvas. It's just me talking to them about an assignment. But then I realized that some of them actually still did not look at the videos. So what do you think I can do to address that?
It's a great question. So when I create my syllabus and also when I create my assignments, I try to create a visual component as well as the text. And the textual component is there for a lot of different reasons. Some students prefer it. Screen readers access it more easily. So if students have a need to do a screen reader or use a screen reader, then the text is really important. But I do try to use visuals. I create infographics, and I have an infographic-based syllabus, and then I post these videos, as Benny mentioned. And I do that for my assignments, and I also do it to introduce each unit. I have an explanation of what we'll cover, how we'll access learning goals for the course, and I explain it via video. But you're right, you can create the most beautiful course in the world, and if students aren't engaging with it, or they're not watching your videos, or they're not reading your infographics, you're still going to get 1,000 emails before an assignment is due asking you the questions that you covered in the video. So one of the things that I've done a couple different things. One of the things that I've done is actually in that first 5 to 10 minutes of every class where I ask students how they're doing, I also ask them how they're accessing Canvas. Have you noticed that I posted this thing on Canvas? I didn't realize, for example, that students don't get a notification, at least the way our Canvas version is set up. They do not get notified when I upload something. So sometimes they have no clue that I added something, and they told me, I'm taking 4 or 5 classes. I can't keep track of the fact that you uploaded something on Tuesday evening and my other professor uploaded something Wednesday morning, and I'm trying to check this as often as possible, but where did you put that video anyway? Each professor has set up their class differently. So what I think is intuitive, because I set up my classes this way, it's intuitive for me. It's not intuitive for my students because they're dealing with 4 different faculty members, organizational styles, and just upload habits. So I find that when I show students at the beginning of class, hey, I uploaded this video. It's about your assignment. I'm just going to screen share for a second. So this is our course. If you click on assignments and you click on this tab, if you wait just a second, here's the video. So you're going to want to listen to that after class. And when I show them exactly where it is in Canvas, I have higher engagement with the video. Again, that might seem like, why do I have to do this? Can't I do it one time and then every other time after that I tell them it's where the other ones were? No, they're just so overwhelmed. And again, they're dealing with different faculty members' organizational styles. Every time I upload something, I do that. I show them in class. And that's part of that community building, I think, as well, because then students feel like they know what they're talking about or they know where to go on the Canvas site. And the second thing I do is I post after all the videos, I post a discussion board question, and it's optional. Students don't have to opt in, but I tell them, if you have questions about the video or questions you think are useful or interesting for yourself and others, please post them there because it will help others access the video, and they participate in those. They watch, the ones who watch the video will then post questions that I can answer, and it's really great because I get immediate feedback on what was clear and what isn't, but providing them the space where it's not just a passive opportunity, but they can actually create they have an active role. Like, what's the point of me watching this video? Oh, the point is I can ask you some questions and deepen my understanding of what you need me to do or whatever. And I modeled that in my very first set of videos on the syllabus. I did not make the question piece optional. I made it mandatory for the students. It was one of their assignments, was that they would watch the syllabus videos and then write questions about them. And I said, everybody will have at least one question, I'm sure. If you don't, watch the video again and come up with a good question. And so I had 5 videos and they had to come up with a question after each video. And that was super useful to me as an instructor too, because a lot of the questions clustered around the same things. And I realized I'd forgotten to address something in my syllabus, which I was able to pick up on right away and then work with. But because I did those videos and I required those questions immediately, they now are used to asking questions after watching videos. So I think you have to require it once. I guess if I'm talking in a circle, what am I trying to say? Providing the videos, providing a space for students to interact with the videos, requiring they do it one time so they get used to it and they see the value in it. They see that I responded to the questions, not just to them, but as a whole, as the course. It's 7 of you asked this question. That's really great. I forgot to address that. Here's my response. Then they feel like those questions mattered and it wasn't just a rote activity. It influenced the class in some way. And then they are more apt to participate in watching the videos and writing questions about them afterward.
So it looks like that you create a lot of videos. What is the platform that you use to do this video? A Zoom or a Canvas or what?
So I just, in Canvas, there's a recorder that's embedded right in Canvas. So if I upload a document on the page, I can go to upload video, and then right there, instead of hitting upload, you can hit record. And I don't do complicated videos. I'm talking about things that are 2 minutes, 3 minutes long, just me talking about what the assignment says or what I noticed in past classes students typically did wrong or typically did in ways that weren't super productive. So it's kind of supplemental. If students didn't watch the video, they could still complete the assignment, but if they watch the video, they get more hints and explanations. So there's an incentive to do it. To watch these videos. I also, again, try to keep them super short, but because they're super short, I can just go into Canvas and record them there. If I'm recording a lecture, or something like that, I use Zoom and I can screen share and do things like that. That's for videos that are 10 minutes or longer and are delivering course content and important things I want students to watch or maybe rewatch. But if I'm just doing these short explanatory videos, I just use the embedded platform in Canvas. And I know other learning management systems also have similar features where you can do an embedded video. Before I had Canvas, we just got Canvas this summer at the College of the Holy Cross, I simply would pick up my iPhone and I would just record myself. I'd rest it on my laptop so I could see me, and then I would record 2 minutes or something like that, and then I would just upload it as a video. So even if you don't have a sophisticated LMS, you can use your phone to substitute for those short videos anyways. A 2 or 3 minute video isn't going to take up a whole lot of space if you upload it. Longer videos, your phone might get overwhelmed if you're recording many 10-minute videos or videos that are longer than that. So that's when I think using Zoom or Panopto or something else can be super useful.
Earlier, you talked about infographics. Can you explain a little bit? Because I think the college students, they love something that is beyond text. What are those infographics?
Yeah, so infographics are simply a visual way of making an argument clear, right? And so we see them all the time in magazines and newspapers and in other spaces on websites to illustrate patterns, to illustrate trends, or sometimes just to sometimes they're not about patterns, but mostly they are. But you can also see infographics that talk about how to do something, how-to guides, or they use images or some kind of symbols to organize material in a way that's more visual than it is textual. So I always have a textual print off, like I have a one-page outline for all of my units, for example, for my course as a syllabus for my assignments, but then I try to go into a ready-made program. You don't have to be a tech wizard to do this. You can go into Canva, which is different than Canvas, so Canva, or Pick-to-Chart, which is my favorite software to use, and they have templates already available. Some of them are educational in nature, so you can pick a different template. So I actually made a little book on Pick-to-Chart that was full of infographics this semester on how to do assignments for my digital writing class, because students are doing podcasts, they're doing videos, they're doing other things that are not usual for an English class. So I wanted to make sure they had information on how to do these things in a visual and easy to access way. So I made a little booklet. It was just a short little booklet that was 12 pages, and it has some text in it, but it also has some images. And the best part about it was I did not have to design it. Pick-to-Chart had the template, and I flipped through some of the templates until I found one that I thought worked for me. The first page was a timeline. It was already there. And I was like, this is perfect. I'll map out when the different projects are due during the semester so they can have a semester timeline. And then a couple of other ready-made graphics had things that were organized in groups of 3. And I thought, okay, well, this is a really nice design. I like this group of 3. Maybe I'll come up with the top 3 things they should be worried about when they are recording a podcast. And so sometimes it's easier to create an infographic if you're not experienced with creating infographics or with organizing your material visually by perusing examples. And some of them are educational, some of them are not, so you have to use your imagination. And then thinking, how can I organize my material to fit it into this graphic? That might not be the best way to go about designing all your course materials, but for your first infographic or first visual exercise, it's amazing what you can do to make your very complex learning goals fit into 3 small images. And, you know, the infographic is never the sum total of what you're doing. There's always supplemental work that goes into that. There's explanation you can give in person. There's extra text you can provide. There's one-on-one conversations. There's class discussion. But creating these infographics or these visual ways to access information, I think highlights to students what is most important in your assignment or in your unit or in your syllabus, and it gives them a different way to see the material.
I need to borrow that 12-page book.
Yeah, I
Can I
will.
check it out?
If you're interested, you can look at it.
I am interested.
It's just one of those little things that I picked up a template and I started plugging in my material into the template. I deleted some pages, I added an extra box in other pages, but if I had to create an infographic from scratch, it would have taken me a year to create the class that I created in basically 6 weeks, right? So maybe in a future version, I can be more creative and I can, you know, do things that are not ready-made for me, but I love the Pick-to-Chart in Canva ready-made templates. And I think it can be fun. It can be a good exercise to figure out what you really want from your students and what's most important to you, because you can't say as much in an infographic sometimes as you can with one page single-spaced of text, right? So
I'm aware that our time is running out, so I want to respect your time, Kristina.
Sure.
Is there a last question that you may have, Pui Lan, or a last comment that you may have, Kristina, about building a virtual community in our classes?
My last question is how to manage your time. It seems that you are very involved and engaged all the time, doing all these videos and monitoring the process. How do you manage your time?
Superwoman, Kristina.
I think the biggest thing is approaching all of these things like creating infographics and videos as parts of class planning and using them in ways that free up your time. So it might seem like a huge amount of time to invest into creating an infographic or making a video, but it's a worthwhile investment if it shields you from 25 emails that could have been cropping up if expectations were not clear or if students didn't have access to the information that you provided. If you find you're creating infographics or videos that students are not accessing or they're creating more work and time, then maybe they're not the best investment of time for your classes right now in a pandemic as we are shifting online. But I think if you use them well and you incentivize student interaction with them, they can free up time after the fact or after they've been posted. So I found that I had an extremely stressful September. All of the building was happening then. I had to build all these infographics and videos, and I was constantly answering student emails. But even just in 1 week in October, I've noticed my schedule freeing up an awful lot more. So I think that what I'm talking about with the videos, the creation of visual materials, makes your planning and the first weeks of your semester extremely intensive, but it's an early investment for a little bit more free time in October, November, December, as we move through and students get into a routine. So the short answer is I think we're all feeling overworked and overburdened, and I don't know that videos or infographics will solve that for you, and I don't know that there's any app that can solve that for anyone, but I do know if you incentivize students to engage with well-designed materials, that the initial investment can be very good, because then you'll have a little bit less of that work to do as the semester rolls on.
Thank you so much, Kristina. Any last thought for us as you think about building a virtual community?
Yeah, the only last thing I would say is a lot of the things I've been talking about have been based on the model of a discussion-based class where students can actually interact with one another. I imagine these challenges are much different or intensive in courses that are more lecture-based or much larger than the classes that I typically teach. And I think using some of these materials could still be a good way to work with large classes or to work with lecture-based materials, but I do think the community building comes in discussion, and wherever we have an opportunity to create that for our students on Zoom, you know, that is very useful. When I did this survey of my class last week, I asked my students, do you prefer that more of our course would go asynchronous? Would you prefer to keep going? Because we're meeting at the normal times. We're Zooming for the entire amount of time that we would be in class, and all of the students said, no, we'd rather be on Zoom. We don't want asynchronous materials. So I think if you're doing the community building right in Zoom, the students look forward to it, or they're excited about talking to you and their peers. Of course, that's very idealistic. Maybe my students were not honest with me in their forms, even though I said they could be and it was anonymous. But I think that in general, if those discussions are happening, students see them as worthwhile if they can participate in that. Makes them want to do a Zoom class. But of course, that's very challenging for all of us in this current environment.
Thank you so much. That's been a wonderful conversation. You always give me so much to think about, and I learn more when I try to do it, right? So I'll have more questions for you in the future, I'm sure. But in the meantime, please do email me your 12-page book, because I really want to learn from that. So thank you so much again, Kristina, for your time. This is really great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.